As I mentioned at the start of the show, we're going to be interviewing today. We have online, I hope we have online, a gentleman who's been on the show before. He's a former United States Congressman, Dave Brat. He represented a Northern District of Virginia from 2014 to 2019, through end of 2018. And he is the one who became, this isn't the only reason he's famous, but he became famous because he defeated in a primary Eric Cantor, who was at the time the majority leader in the Republican Party. So Dave Brat really had a kind of a feisty campaign back in 2014 and won that seat, and he served in Congress for 4 years, or 2 terms. He now is with Liberty University, and he is the new dean of their School of Business. That was as of January this year. He's also a Ph.D. in economics. And the reason I want to talk with him today is about what's happening in Washington. This budget deal was apparently reached between Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, and I guess factions of the U.S. House, and apparently with the Trump administration, but a budget deal that many conservatives are unhappy about. It seems like it's a budget buster. It requires raising the debt ceiling. And I wanted to get the impressions and thoughts of someone who's both an economist, a wonderful member of the U.S. Congress, and now the dean of business of the business school at Liberty University. So, hello, Dr. Brat.
Hey, Debbie, and a good friend of Debbie Georgatos, so thank you. Thanks for having me on.
I'm so glad you could join us, and just really, I'm so grateful you could join us. And, you know, I want to start with, I just think this isn't, and I will tell you, by the way, he says a good friend. When he was in Congress, we did an event in our home for him here in Dallas, just because we love, I mean, all the way from Texas, we could see in Washington who was a leader, an outspoken leader for conservative ideas in Congress, and Congressman Brat definitely was that. So we were very honored to host him in our home and try to support his campaign. So, but back to where we are, and I just love that you're also an economist. We have a deal that apparently has been struck between the Republicans, the Republican majority in the Senate, and it appears the president may be on board with it, a budget deal. But I want to start first with this, about our U.S. budget and our overall economic health or lack thereof. I think our debt in this country is something like $22 trillion. Is that correct?
Yep, right on the money.
So to speak. Okay, $22 trillion. So when Congress wants to raise the debt, and I want to say something about the debt limit. I want to say this to our happy listeners. You know, we have credit cards. Everybody has credit cards. If we get up to the limit of our credit card and we need more credit, we really don't have the ability to just contact the credit card company and say, hey, you know what? I don't have any money and I can't pay my debt, but could you please increase my credit limit? I might be able to borrow money somewhere else and try to pay off that credit card, but the U.S. government doesn't work like that. This $22 trillion debt we have, the way in which Congress raises its credit limit is just to pass a new credit limit into law. Is that accurate?
Yeah, no, that's accurate. And, you know, per person, it's about $50,000 of debt per person per worker, which is the more relevant measure. It's double that because there's about 150 million workers in the U.S., so it's $100,000 in debt. And then on top of that, we're leaving off Medicare and Social Security and all the unfunded liabilities. That's $100 trillion. So you can multiply those by 5, right? So instead of 100,000 per worker, it's 500,000 per worker. We're running behind. Our promises to pay are huge. We don't have the money. And the main problem with the debt, and this is the irony of ironies, right? The liberals are full of compassion and love and care for everybody, and they drive Subarus and all things like that. But they're racking up this debt on the next generation of kids. They supposedly care for the kids, right? So their values and virtues, they say we care, but if you look at the specifics, the healthcare costs in the country are going up. The economic growth went down under the Democrats. The debt goes up. And so the $1 trillion deficit we're going to have this year, in 1 year, $1 trillion, right? We're spending more than we're bringing in, even with economic growth doing pretty well under President Trump. That $1 trillion deficit is going to be paid for by the next generation. So we're getting all the goodies right now, and that's the budget, right? All the goodies in the budget we're getting, present generation. The next generation is going to have to go to work, get their paycheck, work hard, probably have lower economic growth and less opportunity, pay higher taxes, and pay all their household bills, and then pay off all the goodies we spent this year. And that's the true pain of the debt. No one wants to talk about because no one's ever had to pay it off, right? No generation in U.S. history has ever had to pay off this tremendous avalanche that's come and due. And that's without mentioning Medicare and Social Security and all those becoming insolvent within a decade. And that's not a prediction, that's math. Just go look up the Medicare, board report and the Social Security Board of Trustees report, and it's all right there.
It is. It's so troubling, so alarming. And I do want to, those are real basic terms. And I meant to say at the start, pretend I only took Economics 101 in college. And so, and you're an economist. And so I want to just do some basic things. One is the debt being the total amount of money we owe, like your family maybe have a debt for your mortgage, or maybe you borrowed money for some other reasons, but you have an overall debt. But the deficit is the amount of money that you spend every year more than you anticipate taking in. That's right? Right. So you just said
that's right. It's like a bathtub. The debt is the total level of the water. So all the water in the bathtub, and the deficit is the amount of water you added this year to the debt.
Okay.
Right.
So you just said $1 trillion in deficit this year, and that is as against $22 trillion, the entire debt, which has obviously accumulated over decades and gone up and down various points. But that seems extremely, that percentage seems scary, alarming, and are we in new territory getting that high?
Yeah, no, I mean, in gross terms, it's the GDP is about 20 trillion, the debt's 22 trillion, so you're 100% GDP to debt. And the more worrisome part is it's just built in the cake right now, right? I mean, we're going to have trillion-dollar deficits. There's no fiscal discipline in the picture whatsoever going forward. And then for the people at home reading, go out to Politico and Roll Call and The Hill. Those are the political rags up in D.C., very leftist. And a month ago, or 6 months ago, the White House puts in a budget, right? They're not in charge of the budget. Congress is. Congress is Article 1. Congress is in charge of spending. And so a month or two ago, the White House puts out a preliminary budget, with Mick Mulvaney and all the smart people. And all the headlines, Trump, ruthless, cuts, terrible, austerity, he's gonna ruin your life. Go to the same papers today. Politico's headline today is Deficit Don, they're calling him. They're blaming the spending on him. He put in a White House budget that cuts spending, and then he's got to make a deal with Pelosi, who's Article 1, Congress, right, the House. It's her budget that has all the increased spending, and he's got to compromise with that, and then Schumer in the Senate.
Okay,
puts tremendous pressure. And in a nutshell, the Republicans have to fight for the defense budget. The press will never ask Democrats what they want on the defense side, and of course they won't say a word about it. And then on all the rest, right? The Republicans are weak because they give in to this dollar for dollar, right? If we do dollar defense, we're going to give the Democrats a dollar to blow on whatever they want. And believe me, they got a list that goes on forever.
We're going to get to the Democrats list in a moment, but I want to just ask one other question, which is a little bit outside the immediacy of the numbers. I think that many Americans, they hear members of Congress give speeches, they hear other organizations speak up about the danger of the debt, and they see that the debt goes up, and politicians come home during their time in their districts and give speeches and say, don't worry about it, we're going to get on top of it, it's terrible, we can't have this debt. And then they go back and they keep spending money. And it seems to people ultimately, I think, that maybe all the alarmism or all the concern being expressed about the debt is hyperbolic, is hyperbole, that really there's no reason to be so concerned because really, after all the concern expressed, nothing seems to happen. So tell me, Congressman and Ph.D. in economics, Dave Brat, what is the harm to America if we just keep increasing the debt? Is it true that just nothing will happen, so why not just keep increasing it?
No, you'll run into a brick wall, and the brick wall's coming. And one of the easiest ways, you just go look up the Social Security when it becomes insolvent. And it's not a D.C. cut, right? In D.C., when something grows by 2%, they call it a cut, right?
Yep.
So it's still huge. It grows by 2%, and they say, well, we wanted it to grow at 4, and it's only growing at 2, so that's a cut. So that's D.C. speak. When Social Security runs out of money, right, when it's insolvent in about 10 years, there'll be a 20% haircut or clip to benefits of all people on Social Security. And then the debt can't rise enough to pay for that. And you're already in debt, and the people are already constrained, so they don't want a tax increase, and that's when it's going to hit. And the same with Medicare and Medicaid and everything else. We've blown through all the trust fund money. We blew through all the savings money that was in the piggy bank. We played every trick in the book. We've been massaging the data. We've been making up stuff for 2 decades, and it's all coming due. And it's all going to be on the next generation. And the kids don't know, because K-12 education has dumbed them down so bad in economics. They won't teach them economics, because otherwise you'd be a conservative. And so that's
true.
it.
That's true. Otherwise, you'd be a conservative. That's a funny line.
Right.
Very, very true. Okay, but back to this. What if we default? I saw that Mitch McConnell, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, was interviewed in one of the weekend news shows, and when he was asked about what are we going to do, we have this budget battle, we have this enormous debt. We need to raise the debt ceiling to accommodate our spending. And his answer was, his very first words out of his mouth as well, no matter what, we're not going to default. We're never going to default on a loan. We're not going to default. And so what I want to get at with you is, isn't that kind of a hollow victory or something? I mean, we're going to borrow more money, so we aren't technically in default on on our loans, but we're not fixing anything. That's not much of a victory, right?
No, they're just using that language as bailout language because they don't want to stand up. And you can tell they're not serious, right? Because if the Republicans were serious, you have to start educating the American people a year or two ahead of time. And so they know they got the 2020 election. They don't want to be in this spending budget battle, because it's like asking the American people, do you want to eat spinach? And the answer is no, right? We want all of our consumer goods right now. And so the Republicans are in a tougher spot, right, because it's kind of like unilateral disarmament. The Democrats say yes to everything. The lobbyists walk into a Democrat's office and say, can we have this? And they say yes. They walk into a Republican's office, and the Republican goes, well, I got to study that. And then the lobbyist takes that as a no. And so guess who gets all the campaign contributions? The
Right.
one who says yes. So the Democrats are in a total, winning political enterprise because they say yes to everything, but they're bankrupting the country in the meantime. The Republicans try to be principled, but at the end of the day, they're running against unprincipled party right now, right? And the Pelosi, when Pelosi appears as a conservative, you got problems.
Yeah.
Right? She's a conservative strand in her own party compared to some of the others. And so I think Elizabeth Warren, if you add up her policy prescriptions, I think they add up to $100 trillion in new spending over 10 years. If I have that right? So you can look that up.
Yeah. I want to get to her briefly because I saw Elizabeth Warren is trying to take the high road, or claiming she's taking the high road, the serious road. She understands we're heading for a fiscal cliff, we're heading for chaos, we have to do some fixes. But so she's trying to be kind of, I'm the sane voice in economics on the left, because after all, I have a plan. And to your point, her plan involves massive increased spending. I believe she's one of the people who signed on, at least in principle, the Green New Deal. She wants free college for everybody. She wants to have the minimum wage. And there's no reason, if it can be $15, it can't. Why couldn't it be like $100 million? It could be anything. You just say a number, but she has a plan, and she's trying to sound conservative, but what she really is doing, she's arguing for massive new spending. And I don't know yet what her tactic is, but if you're familiar with her plan at all, what is the way she's paying for that new spending? Do you have any idea in her plan?
No, it has to be a massive tax increase, right? So if she's got $100 trillion in new spending over 10, that's $10 trillion more per year. I mean, and you'd have to double your taxes, and she doesn't want to say that. And then the press will never ask them a question, and unfortunately, the Republican leadership gets the same benefit. So if you go Google a few weeks ago, if you Googled the budget under Roll Call, The Hill, Politico, all the political rags up there, they'll have articles on the budget without ever mentioning the budget number. And they certainly won't tell you the debt, and they certainly won't tell you that the kids are going to pay for the debt. And those are the most simple points you can make, right? What is the budget? How big is it? How much is the deficit? Who's going to pay for it? And you'll never hear reporting on that because that is the Democrat advantage politically. They spend, they promise you goodies, they're bankrupting the country, everybody knows it, and no one wants to stand up and lead because it's a rough business up there.
It is a rough business up there. I was going to put up, I have my incredibly wonderful producer, Matt. I sent him a chart. I actually think I put this chart up a few weeks ago in some other discussion we had, but basically it's about where our budget goes. Because if you look online, I'll mention one thing about this while Matt is getting it, but if you look online, you can see a lot of headlines, and then you know how someone puts a headline up and then all the echo chamber puts the same headline, and they were saying, the headline was essentially Republicans demand military spending, 51% of the federal budget goes for the military, and they weren't even happy with that. And, absurdity. So now, Matt the Wonderful, if we have that chart to put up, the military spending in this country, defense spending, is at 15%. 15.
Right, that's right.
Okay, so...
Yeah, what they mean, when they say that, they mean 50% of discretionary spending. And so what they don't want to talk about is 3/4 of the budget, which is mandatory spending. And it's called mandatory because it's mandatory. Because you don't have any choice in it. You have to pay everybody that gets to 65, gets Social Security, Medicare. If you hit certain criteria, Medicaid, all interest on the debt, that's mandatory payments. That's over 2/3 of the budget now. So the press just leaves that off on the side, and no one will ever talk about reforming that, and that's the budget buster. It used to be a 1/4 of the budget. Now it's approaching 3/4 of the budget. And you're right, defense is not 50%. It's 15%, right?
Yeah, and there's 3/4 of the budget, the federal budget being mandatory spending, are on programs like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, CHIP, all sorts of other marketplace subsidies, safety net programs. And so when you say mandatory, you mean that it's written into the underlying legislation that either created or perpetuated these programs, that Congress would have to change the language, the law, and the underlying programs in order to be permitted not to fund it. Is that right? Right,
exactly, right.
And who's going to bravely step up and change the underlying Social Security law?
Oh, nobody. That's the problem, right? And you can reform those programs in ways to incentivize it to make people healthier and live longer and turn it all into smart stuff. But no one wants to do that because if you threaten just the giveaway machine, you're in trouble.
Sure are. So I have one last question for you. It's a really big one, and I don't know whether there's one simple answer, but if you a PhD in you're a PhD economist, you've been a member of Congress, I also mentioned you also went to have a seminary degree. I just love that about you. It's a kind of a well-rounded thinker, but what would you do if you could be in charge in Congress and say we have to get the federal debt under control? What is the reasonable thing that could be put in place, I'm not saying overnight, but over years, to get America back to fiscal sanity? Is there even a plan out there talking about that? Or if not, what would you do if you could create one?
Not really. I mean, the real problem, and that's why I'm so happy to be at Liberty University right now, and that the students here and the faculty are just unbelievable, and just what a positive place to be. But the key is on the side we're not talking about, which is the economic growth side. And what you have to do there is reform K-12 education and throw it upside down, and then reform higher education, which is just a disaster. Over half the growth in university spending is they got a dean for every new crazy idea under the sun now. You're not paying for education. You're paying for all these crazy support services and fancy buildings and, et cetera. And so we need to get back to the basics in this country. So if I was in charge, that's what I would focus on. At Liberty University, we're making deals with IBM right now, and kids are getting these orange badges and certificates in Oracle and IBM. They're going to get jobs that are doing great, train them in technologically. And we ought to be offering that in every city and every county and every state across the country. And if you get kids productive, they go out and make a ton of money. There's no upper bound on growth, right? The poor have been miseducated by the left into thinking that there's this rich class and then everyone else is consigned to being in poverty. That's absolutely false. Everybody in the country can get rich. If you produce and are productive and your kid gets smart and gets a badge from some company and gets a skill, they're rich, period. End of debate. And it's that simple. But conservatives are not making that case. We're not reforming education. And the left owns it, right? They own all the teachers' unions, so it's very hard to do that. But eventually, the American people are going to get so upset with the status quo, they're going to demand it.
This is a great note on which to wrap this up. You said something earlier about the idea that about the American people and what they understand, and more people in Washington helping to inform the American people. I actually do think if the American people realized how extremely out of balance the federal budget is in Washington, how unbelievably irresponsible it is to keep on creating and funding programs and growing programs that are fiscally irresponsible, that we have Medicare is going to run out of money and Social Security is going to run out of money. If you had more people tuned into that and willing to put pressure on their member of Congress to say, I want you to stop passing these budget-busting budgets. I want you to be fiscally responsible. Because right now there is really no political consequence for members of Congress who can, even on the conservative side, they may have different spending priorities and they may be more responsible and they may not want to have lavish programs that increase dependency, but they don't really want to get in and fight. We got to cut this, because there seems to be no political consequence. In fact, it's only political downside to them. I'd love to have the American people understand more about everything you just said and more about your idea about kids from K through 12 and in college learning economic responsibility, learning economics, getting themselves trained and ready for the world. Because I do think that one big piece of this is the American people being more alert to it and letting Congress know you've got to stop this. We're not going to keep electing you unless you get on top of this. So last shot, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, you're right on the money, and it will be unbelievable that Republicans are going to vote for this budget or allow enough votes, right? Leadership may let a few people vote no, but they will arrange so that there are enough votes to increase spending by $300 billion, have a $1 trillion deficit, and if people really want to understand what's going on, I mean, why did we not repeal Obamacare, right? Because the big money and the lobbyists are so good. The lobbyists are really good when you never hear of them. It sounds a little conspiracy-minded, but that's what we're dealing with, right? When you really got good lobbyists, how can you promise as a party to repeal something for 7 years and then get in power and leave Obamacare in place?
Yes,
right? There's only one reason, because the powers that be and the money interests up there dominate leadership on both sides. And then if you want to be on committees, you listen to leadership. And we didn't repeal Obamacare. We still have, many socialized health care. Costs are going through the roof. There's no price system. There's no free market system at play at all, so that people can shop and you can see the price of your product you're buying. And it's a political failure. And so hold the people responsible when you say you're going to repeal, and if they don't vote them back in office.
I am so for that. Congressman Brat, Dr. Brat, thank you so very much for joining me today. I hope we can do this again sometime soon. Thank you so much for all your insights.
Anytime. Thank you, Debbie. Great show. Have a great day.
You too. All. Thank you, sir. Okay, this guy, I'm very sorry, he's not in Congress anymore. He was just a stellar member of Congress. And to have a combination of the heart for his faith, he has has a seminary degree, a Ph.D. in economics, and a member of Congress. He's just been stellar. But Liberty University is blessed to have him, and I love to have his insights really about how this looks inside Congress, what's happening, why we can't do the things that I would say many conservatives assume Congress should be able to do, which includes at least fighting back against endless increases on the debt ceiling. But I guess that's for next time. Sounds like President Trump is going to sign this bill. So we'll just move forward and we'll have to have this discussion again. This bill will. One reason people are saying maybe Trump is going to go for it is that once this is in place, if it does get signed, we kind of put off the whole issue of the debt ceiling and the budget until after the next election cycle. And I guess people get very concerned when the election's coming up in 2020 about what, they don't want to be the one who stood up and said no on spending, said yes on cutting spending. They don't want to do that now, but this will get them past the 2020 elections, not just the president, but all the members of the U.S. House, and at least 1/3 of the Senate who's ever is up for re-election in 2020. So there you have it. But these economics they're people issues, folks. They're not just numbers and dollars and cents. They're people issues about the safety and security and stability of our society when you have a stable economy, which we are continuing to disrupt as we continue out of control spending.